The evening shift was usually uneventful for Jada, a 28-year-old waitress at the Lantern Café. Nestled in a sleepy corner of the city, the café had a quiet charm, drawing an eclectic mix of regulars who sought solace in its warm light and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Jada appreciated its predictability. The rhythm of taking orders and sharing polite banter was her respite from a world that often felt too chaotic. Tonight, however, was destined to be anything but ordinary. The first sign was the low hum of a sleek electric car pulling into the cafe's gravel parking lot. It wasn't the typical sputtering engine of the retirees' sedans or the clunky vans of the delivery guys. Then came the chime of the doorbell, sharper than usual, against the quiet hum of conversations. Jada glanced up and froze. In walked Elon Musk. Dressed in a simple blazer and jeans, he looked different from the larger-than-life figure she'd seen on countless screens. He seemed almost human. His presence, however, commanded the room. The conversations hushed, and heads turned subtly to steal glances. Jada's heart quickened, the moment surreal. Was it really him? She forced herself into motion, her sneakers padding against the tiled floor as she approached his table near the window. He was staring outside, his expression distant, as if the world beyond the glass held secrets only he could decode. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What can I get for you tonight?" He turned to her, his gaze sharp but kind. "Just coffee black and, whatever pie you've got." "Coming right up," she replied, retreating to the counter to prepare his order. As she worked, she became acutely aware of the whispers around her. The regulars, mostly retirees with strong opinions and sharper tongues, were already murmuring. Some were intrigued, others skeptical. Elon Musk here, in their little cafe. She returned to his table, setting the coffee and a slice of pecan pie before him. "Here you go," she said with a smile. "Thanks," he said, offering a small nod before turning his attention back to the window. Jada retreated to the counter, stealing glances as he ate. She couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and curiosity. What brought someone like him to a place like this? Was he here for a meeting, a moment of solitude? The cafe's tranquility didn't last. One of the regulars, a gruff man named George, cleared his throat loudly and rose from his seat. George had a reputation for speaking his mind, and tonight was no exception. He ambled over to Elon's table, his boots thudding against the floor. "Excuse me," George said, his voice loud enough to draw every pair of eyes in the room. "You're Elon Musk, right?" Elon looked up, his expression calm. "Yes, I am." George crossed his arms, his stance confrontational. "So, tell me, you're the guy behind all these self-driving cars and rocket ships. What's the deal with trying to put chips in people's heads now? You trying to turn us all into robots?" A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the cafe. Jada's cheeks flushed as she watched the exchange, her hands tightening on the edge of the counter. Elon's lips twitched into a faint smile, but his tone remained measured. Neuralink is about helping people with disabilities, those who've lost the ability to move or communicate. It's not about turning anyone into a robot. George scoffed. "Sure it's not. Big tech always says it's for the good of humanity. Then next thing you know, they're tracking us, controlling us." The murmurs grew louder. Jada felt a knot of frustration tighten in her chest. She wanted to intervene, but her boss, Mr. Carmichael, had a strict rule about employees staying out of customers' debates. She glanced at him in the kitchen doorway, but he was preoccupied with a stack of invoices. Elon leaned back, his gaze steady on George. "I understand your concerns," he said evenly, "but my goal has always been to create technology that improves lives. Neuralink, Tesla, SpaceX, they're all part of that vision." George wasn't satisfied. "And all that power and money just happens to end up in your hands, huh?" Jada couldn't stay silent any longer. Her voice cut through the growing tension. "Maybe it's not about power or money," she said, stepping out from behind the counter. "Maybe it's about someone trying to do something that most of us wouldn't even dare to dream of." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Jada felt the heat of their stares, but held her ground. "I've read about Neuralink," she continued, her voice steady. "It's giving hope to people who thought they'd never walk or speak again. How is that a bad thing?" George frowned, his bravado faltering. "Still doesn't mean he's not in it for himself," he muttered. "Maybe," Jada admitted, "but even if he is, does that mean we should dismiss everything he's trying to do? Progress doesn't happen without risks. At least he's trying." She looked at Elon, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. For a moment, she wondered if she'd overstepped. But then he gave her a small, appreciative nod. The tension in the room began to dissipate, but the damage was done. Mr. Carmichael emerged from the kitchen, his face dark with disapproval. "Jada," he said, his tone sharp. "A word." She followed him into the back, her heart sinking. The lecture was brief but stinging. Customers were the cafe's lifeblood, and her job was to serve them, not argue with them. By the time she returned to the floor, her fate was sealed. "You'll finish your shifts this week," Mr. Carmichael said curtly. "After that, we'll have to part ways." Jada's stomach churned as she absorbed his words, fired for standing up for what she believed was right. She avoided the gazes of the regulars as she finished her shift in silence. When the doorbell chimed again, signaling Elon's departure, he paused on his way out. Turning back to her, he said softly, "Thank you." It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried a weight that eased some of her disappointment. She nodded, watching as he disappeared into the night. That night, Jada lay awake, the events replaying in her mind. She had lost her job, but something about the way Elon had looked at her, grateful, almost inspired, gave her a strange sense of hope. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning, Jada woke up with a sense of heaviness that made her want to stay buried under her blankets. The thought of returning to the Lantern Café for her remaining shifts felt like a cruel reminder of how everything had unraveled. Yet, she couldn't abandon her responsibilities. She forced herself to get up, dress, and make her way to the café, her mind replaying George's words, the regulars' whispers, and Mr. Carmichael's decision. The usual chatter of the café greeted her as she entered, but it felt different today, sharper, more pointed. Jada avoided eye contact with the regulars as she tied on her apron and stepped behind the counter, trying to blend into the rhythm of brewing coffee and plating pastries. She didn't need to hear their whispers to know they were talking about her. Mid-morning, the doorbell chimed, and Jada instinctively looked up. Her stomach dropped. Standing in the doorway, as calm as the night before, was Elon Musk. This time, he wasn't alone. Two smartly dressed individuals followed him, their confident strides and air of professionalism making them stand out among the cafe's usual clientele. The room fell silent again, just as it had the previous evening. Elon met her gaze, gave her a small smile, and walked straight to the counter. The two individuals remained near the door, scanning the room with polite detachment. "Good morning," Elon said warmly. "Black coffee, please. And one of those muffins." He gestured to the display case. Jada blinked, momentarily thrown off. Sure," she managed, moving to pour the coffee and grab a plate. Her hands felt steadier than she expected. As she set the coffee and muffin before him, he leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Do you have a few minutes to talk? Outside?" Jada's eyes widened. She glanced at Mr. Carmichael, who was in the back, oblivious to the exchange. Sure," she said, unsure of what else to say. Elon nodded and took his coffee, heading outside. The two professionals trailed after him, leaving Jada to untie her apron and follow them. She felt the stares of the regulars boring into her back, their curiosity palpable. Outside, the crisp autumn air nipped at her cheeks as Elon turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," he began. "It wasn't my intention to disrupt your life. I heard what happened after I left last night. Jada shook her head quickly. You don't need to apologize. I made my own choices. Still, he said, his voice sincere, it's clear you stood up for what you believed in, and that's not something I take lightly. She glanced at the two individuals behind him, who stood slightly apart, their postures relaxed but attentive. Elon followed her gaze and smiled. Right, introductions. This is Priya and Aaron, he said, gesturing to them. They're part of my team. Jada nodded politely, though confusion flickered in her eyes. Your team? Elon's smile widened slightly. Yes. After I left last night, I thought about what you said, how you handled yourself, and how willing you were to speak up even when it cost you. People like you are rare, Jada. I think you'd be a valuable addition to my foundation. Her jaw slackened slightly. Foundation? Elon Musk Foundation, he clarified. We focus on a lot of causes: education, clean energy, disaster relief. And now we're building a community outreach program. We need people who are grounded, empathetic, and willing to connect with others. I'd like you to be a part of that. Jada blinked, struggling to process his words. Was he offering her a job? She searched his face for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke, but his expression was earnest. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Elon chuckled softly. You said yes last night when I suggested it. This is just a follow-up. She laughed nervously, a small rush of relief loosening the tension in her shoulders. I thought you meant something small, like working in a call center or something. Call center? Aaron interjected with a grin. Not exactly. You'd be working with teams that manage grants, oversee projects, and connect with local communities. It's real work, Jada, and it's important. Jada's heart raced as she tried to imagine herself in such a role. She'd spent years pouring coffee and delivering slices of pie, never dreaming she might one day work on something bigger, something that could make a difference. I don't even know if I'm qualified for something like that, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You're more qualified than you realize, Elon replied. I've built companies, Jada, and I've worked with some of the smartest people on the planet. But intelligence isn't the only thing that matters. Integrity, empathy, and courage are just as important, and you have those in abundance. She felt her cheeks flush at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. I'd love to, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I need some time to figure things out, to wrap things up here. Elon nodded. Of course, Priya will stay in touch to iron out the details. No rush. Jada smiled, a mixture of excitement and disbelief coursing through her. As Elon and his team left, she watched them drive away, her thoughts a whirlwind. The rest of her shift passed in a daze, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. Over the next few weeks, Jada transitioned from her role at the Lantern Café to her new position with the foundation. It was a whirlwind of onboarding sessions, introductions to teams, and learning about projects that spanned everything from renewable energy initiatives to scholarships for underprivileged students. The work was challenging but fulfilling. She found herself energized by the sense of purpose, the feeling that she was contributing to something meaningful. Elon checked in occasionally, his encouragement bolstering her confidence. She discovered layers of herself she hadn't known existed: leadership skills, problem-solving abilities, and a capacity to connect with people from all walks of life. One evening, as she prepared a presentation for a community outreach program, Jada reflected on how much her life had changed since that fateful encounter at the cafe. Standing up for what she believed in had cost her a job, but it had opened a door to a world of possibilities. The Lantern Café remained a fixture in her memory, a place where her journey had taken an unexpected turn. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Jada knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a part of something bigger, something extraordinary. And it all began with a quiet encounter.